Hello again, and welcome back to the Break the Twitch podcast on minimizing distractions and doing more of what matters through minimalism, habits, and creativity. I'm your host, Anthony Ongaro. In this episode, I sit down with Andy George, the maker and mastermind behind the Simply Complex podcast and the wildly popular How to Make Everything YouTube channel that currently has over 1 million subscribers on YouTube. Andy shares how the YouTube channel got started from his desire to make a sandwich from scratch. From growing and harvesting his own wheat to milking a cow, the whole process took 6 months and $1,500 to make. We discuss the greater understanding that comes from sourcing materials and learning to make things we take for granted, like the food we eat, a formal suit, or even clear glass. Additionally, we talk about creativity, building a sustainable business, and the one thing Andy still prefers to make from scratch. Listening through this episode will inspire greater appreciation and curiosity for the everyday objects in your life. Of course, this podcast is brought to you by the Break the Twitch member community. If you're looking for tools, strategies, and a supportive community to help you remove distractions and do more of what matters every day, the member community is for you. Visit breakthetwitch.com/community to learn more about the available resources and join up. But for now, let's start the show. Andy.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the studio. How's it going?
Good.
Good. You are one of the probably biggest Minnesota YouTubers.
To my knowledge, yeah. I don't know of many other that are around here, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know. You know, I haven't been able to meet a ton of other YouTubers in Minnesota here in Minneapolis. So I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast and just hang out for a bit and talk.
Glad to be here.
So you started a YouTube channel about this stuff, which we'll be getting into shortly here. But was that the first kind of thing that led you into getting into YouTube and that kind of thing? Or was there something that came before that?
I was very hesitant about getting into YouTube in the first place. So when I first shot, the whole series started with a sandwich I made and spent a year basically making that. And then I just kind of sat on the footage for 2 years, kind of slowly editing it, not really sure what I wanted to do with it. And initially, I got connected to an opportunity to make it as a local television show. Didn't have any budget, but that didn't end up going anywhere. And the content always felt more TV, like it would be better for TV than for YouTube because it's long content, a lot of work goes into it, where YouTube is just like quick videos. So I didn't really see a future there for this idea. But after trying on local television didn't go anywhere, then I cut it down into something I felt more appropriate for YouTube and threw it on there and ended up going viral with the how to make a $1,500 sandwich in 6 months. And that kind of is what launched it. It's definitely been a lot of work since then to try and get to where we are now, and trying to make a format that's not ideal for YouTube, make it in a way that actually works.
Yeah, in terms of a business and making the content that you want to make, but that is interesting, that also overlaps with what people on YouTube want to see.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the challenge, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to produce year-long projects and also releasing a video more or less every week.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the years before. So you spend all this time making the documentary about the sandwich from scratch.
Yeah.
Just take me back in the life of Andy a few years before that, and like, what were you getting into, and what kind of stuff were you doing?
I started 6 years ago, so I was like 24, I guess. Yeah, so I was in my early 20s. I had just finished college for post-production, for video production, and was getting into my first few jobs, and they were mostly doing ads and stuff that I didn't really enjoy making. There's this stuff people fast forward through, and it's like, I want to make the stuff people actually want to watch. And I didn't really see a pathways to getting into that field. And in college, kind of developed obsession over documentary films. I blame Netflix partially because when they first started online streaming, the database was largely a lot of documentaries. And I think I spent like my summer break just watching tons and tons of documentaries and was going really deep into that. And so after school, I was kind of what I wanted to go into, but I didn't know how. And then at the same time, I'm just moving out on my own and kind of living on my own and learning how to live independent and getting more into cooking and kind of experimenting with that. And I think these two sides kind of united when I was just curious about what if you make food all the way from scratch. And I want to make a meal and see kind of just mostly just curious, like if you made it starting from growing it yourself, would it taste super awesome or would it just turn into a disaster? And the latter ended up being more true. But it was a really fun journey. And after I finally completed it, I realized I could do this with everything else.
To me, this sounds fascinating in the sense of that you are reconnecting with the origins of the things in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Like the sandwich, for example. We can just go buy a sandwich. We can have a sandwich delivered to us at this point, and it just shows up, and we have a complete disconnect between how that thing got put together, the materials that it was made with, and there's a lot of people working very hard to modify things so that they're cheaper and so that they taste better for how cheap it is.
Yeah.
And so what has been your experience? Let's even talk about the sandwich, right? So you spent 6 months. What was that process like, if you can kind of summarize what you went through to make the sandwich and what was the result?
Yeah, I think that definitely was something that I was tapping into. I think I'm just a naturally inquisitive person. I'm probably the kid that really annoyed their parents when I kept asking why. So I think this is just something I honed in on, and like, I'm so disconnected from where my food actually comes from. What happens when I try to do it all myself? So it was a lot of kind of having to learn as I go and realizing how little I do know. Just growing a garden. I grew up with my mom was a gardener, and she would give me a plot, and usually things would just die and I'd lose interest. And so having to actually grow it myself was a challenge. And like, I actually have to make sure this grows and doesn't die. Otherwise I'm wasting all this time and I have to start all over again next year. It was like my commitment that I have to show up and water every 2 days. Otherwise it could dry out. Turned out most of it. A few crops just never even sprouted.
So in growing this stuff, like for this particular sandwich, you did everything. So you didn't buy bread.
Nope.
No, you didn't even buy wheat. You like gathered the wheat.
I got a community garden plot and grew the wheat, which was half the field. Our little plot was just the wheat. And then all the other vegetables, lettuce, tomato, cucumbers. What did
you learn about food through that process? Like what kind of takeaways did you have?
Like just how much goes into it, I guess, is the biggest thing, and all the processing steps. I feel like most people have kind of a vague idea of what it takes to get your food. Like, oh, they grow the wheat, they turn it into flour, and then they bake it into bread. They don't really know how do you turn wheat into flour. And there's the whole process where you got to remove the chaff and use the wind or a fan, make a huge mess in your apartment if you're me. And then you have to grind it up and make a flour. And then there's different types of flours, and that depends on how you grind it and then how you separate it and all that. And just kind of details that kind of slip through the cracks until you actually dissect it and try and do it yourself.
It's interesting hearing about this for me because my learning style. So I did like 2 years in college and ended up dropping out to go work when I was about 20.
Yeah.
And it was because my learning style was very much like just digging into something and trying it and probably failing in some capacity and then trying again. And I've always found that that's how I learn the best. Does that resonate with you in terms of just how how you like learning? Because it seems like you're going
Yeah.
through every step.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I can generally conceptualize things before by just reading it, but until I like actually do it with my hands, I feel like that's like really connects things in my brain of like this is how a sandwich is made.
Yeah. Do you feel like that has grown your appreciation for everything now?
Oh, definitely. It's hard to waste any food. It's like there's so much work going into this.
What has been the most challenging video for you to make so far, and why? Like, what was the process?
I don't know. It seems every project has its own challenges, and it's hard to choose one. The longest ongoing challenge has been glass, which trying to make on your own without like a professional studio is very, very difficult. And I'm like slowly acquiring more complicated equipment to make it a little bit easier and learning the science behind it. It still is a huge pain. And it keeps breaking on me. Like, I finally got it clear, and now it's just annealing it and getting it to something that work is super hard. In terms of like longest time commitment and effort that had to go into it was probably the suit. That one blew the sandwich project out of the water just in how difficult it is. It wasn't something I expected. Because clothing, you go to Walmart, you buy a pack of t-shirts for $10. I didn't realize how much work actually goes into turning cotton into actual t-shirt. And like you gotta spin it, you gotta weave it, and all that is just a lot of work.
It makes me think of in the minimalism community, especially here on YouTube, and there's a lot of talk about fast fashion, about slow living, about slow fashion. So I'll ask you this: how much should clothing cost?
I don't have an exact number.
Yeah.
I mean, my suit cost me $4,000, I believe. Get these numbers mixed up. But that was me learning stuff and also having to fly to Texas to pick the cotton and drive to Colorado to pick hemp. So there's some extra costs that you wouldn't necessarily have and having to learn all the processes. But I mean, paying $5 for a t-shirt is pretty insane.
Given that these things have been done at such a large scale now, and in terms of modern manufacturing and all this stuff, I get that the price can be driven down, but it does seem crazy to me that things are becoming so disposable in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned your journey to make clear glass, which I remember when I was a kid, someone told me that you just kind of melt sand and it that's how glass is made. It's turned from sand to glass. Obviously, it's a lot more complex than that.
Yeah.
And I believe if I've seen this that this has been a multi-part series of trying to get there.
Yeah.
Would you mind telling me just a little bit about that process? I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically where I started from knowledge-wise. Like, oh, you just melt sand and you get glass. And then we started working with the glass maker, and they're like, no, you got to add some other compounds like flux and stuff. And so then we brought some sand and they added the other stuff, and then we made glass. We made glass that way, which seemed pretty easy. And then I'm like, okay, well, that's not really fully from scratch, because let's try making the flux and everything, then make my own glass and make actual glasses from it. And so I tried to do that, and it did not work at all. I mean, technically, I guess we made glass in the end after baking it long enough, but it was very opaque. There's very cloudy and bubbles in it, and you couldn't see through it at all. I made glasses out of it anyways, just for the humor.
Yeah.
And then I worked on trying to refine that and like figure out the problems, and had a few issues with how I made the flux. Tried to fix that, and then tried it again, and then that wasn't any better. So it ended up being like a multi-part issue of what was and wasn't working, just not having the right equipment, and then not being able to chemically purify stuff. And then I did a lot of tests after that and found that like even when I do purify it and or when I just use store-bought ingredients and try and do it, like even then it's really difficult unless you have the really expensive equipment. So then I realized, well, I need a better flux then. It came to my attention that there was a better flux. So we went to California to collect it, staying with the making it from scratch and collecting it from how it's naturally available, and got the borax and found that was kind of the missing ingredient. That and some better kilns and removing impurities, just learning a little bit more chemistry, and now facing a whole new challenge of trying to anneal it. And I was able to get one pane of glass out. It did crack in half, but there's two solid pieces. But now my attempts are still keep not being able to anneal it quite right.
And annealing is, I'm pretty sure I know what it is, but
Yeah.
is that making it so that it doesn't crack at all? Or
Yeah. So annealing is basically glass is kind of somewhat of a liquid when it's molten, and then as it hardens, the outside will cool faster, and hot things will expand and shrink when they get colder. So then it's cooling unevenly and putting pressure on the glass. So then it'll just shatter if you don't anneal it right. It's kind of a complicated mathematical question of figuring out your thickness and the materials of your glass. And there's a lot of extra variables that I have that make it a challenge to do it right every time.
That's wild. And if you think about simply that we're sitting here in front of cameras with 7 different pieces of glass in them, and they somehow create an image that looks probably like real life for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a chip on the other end, and it's just capturing the information through it.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about, the process of like, let's just get this so that it's relatively clear and not colored in any way, green or blue or whatever. And you can buy a lens like this pretty cheap for what it is. It's just really amazing to me. It just seems like there's a lot that I'm realizing I'm taking for granted as well in this process. Is there something that you've discovered throughout this process that you now prefer to create yourself instead of buying? Or are you like, that was way too hard? Is there anything you found that's like better that you've been able to make yourself?
That's a good question. I'd say a lot of times my end product is nowhere near as good. So a lot of times I am thankful I can buy it. I'd say with a lot of food stuff though, it's some of the homemade versions I've made have been a lot better. Immediately coming to mind is my root beer float, and got to get goat milk and make my own ice cream, which I've never had goat milk ice cream before. It's actually really good. I was surprised. Yeah. I sweetened it with maple syrup and then made my own root beer. The root beer was a little different than like a store-bought. I still liked it. I think I might prefer store-bought root beer better, but combined together though, I mean, it was very good.
That would be unique. I've never had goat milk ice cream. I've had goat milk before, and it's definitely a distinct flavor, and goat milk cheese.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious what the ice cream, did it have that same kind of like punch to it? I don't know how to describe it, but it has like that flavor. So the ice cream as well. And did you make it like vanilla ice cream, or what? How was it flavored as well?
I wanted to get vanilla. We were in Mexico and we went to a farm that had vanilla, but we just missed it, and it was already harvested.
In asking that, I had completely forgotten that in order for you to do that, you would have to get it from a place where they have it naturally. So that adds complexity.
Yeah, you think of vanilla as just plain, but that's actually a specific spice that is a little difficult to get when you live in Minnesota.
Yeah, I would imagine none of it grows here at all. When you're planning your videos and you're kind of figuring out what technology you're gonna tackle next, how do you figure that out? Does it sort of evolve, or do you just have a method?
Well, after I did the sandwich, I just started writing a list of just like things that I thought would be interesting to make, and I think I'm only finally starting to get through that initial list. But the joy of this is that whenever I do a video, that it then brings on ideas for like 5 more. So it seems like an infinite list. Right now we're doing this at the end of the year, so on this stage I'm kind of planning out all of next year, and that's always a fun mess of figuring out roughly what ingredients you need and how are you going to get them. Do we need to grow them? Do we just start growing them right now so we have it in 6 months? Do we need to travel somewhere? And if we're going to travel somewhere, what are all the other things in that area we can collect to make it kind of worth the money? Because every travel expedition is pretty expensive. So we gotta make it worth it. And then like the what's the chronological order of them? I try to kind of build in complexity as I go. So start with like I made a candle, and eventually want to get to a light bulb. So there's gonna be a few steps in between there.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So that's what's going on in my head right now.
Sometimes you feel like we haven't come that far.
Mhm.
You have those moments. But my friend joked with me, he said, look, I'll drop you off on an island, on a barren island, and I'll give you my phone number. And when you call me, I'll come pick you up.
Yeah.
And the idea of trying to make a cell phone from coconuts and and sand and things that you find on a remote island is both hilarious and unreasonable, right? And
Yeah.
so, do you think at some point you can see this your channel and the stuff you're doing? Like, are you going to end up making a cell phone someday, or do you think you'll?
I hope so.
Yeah.
At least a telephone is definitely on my list. And one of the big things for this next year is trying to get into electronics and electricity. One of the roadblocks for that was copper, which is a pretty big component for pretty much every electronic. So that's going to open up a whole other door. And that's something I don't have a lot of knowledge about. Not that I know anything before, but like for me, technology, I know how to use technology, but how it actually works might as well be magic to me. I'm both intrigued to dig into that and learn it. And then I think I'm surprised like how feasible it is, because making glass and stuff is difficult, but it makes sense. Like, yeah, somebody can make glass. Like somebody can make a computer. Just there's so much I don't understand that it may as well be learning sorcery.
Yeah. It seems the idea of making a microchip.
Mhm.
I know a bit just about your processes of developing these things, getting each raw material, but making the most simple microchip for like an Atari 64, like an original Atari or something.
Yeah.
That even that to me is overwhelming to think about where I would even start with that.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that. But as each step comes along, you kind of learn a little bit more, and
Mhm.
you get to the next part of the process.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is that just how much experimentation and learning we've had to do over millennia of humanity's lifetime just to like get to the building blocks of what we're able to use today, like being able to refine metals and make glass and get all these compounds. And now, like the past 100 years, we're just like finding ways to use them in kind of developing our technology. So it's like it seems like we've developed so much in 100 years, but it took millions of years to get to that step.
Even the most raw materials.
Yeah.
So a big part of Break the Twitch is a framework around the ideas of minimalism, removing distractions,
Mhm.
habits, doing more of what matters each day, and creativity. So exploring creative solutions to the problems you may be facing in life, or just creating stuff in general.
Mhm.
I'm really curious how some of those things have impacted your life as a creator, being someone that is cranking out this content that requires a lot of planning and,
Mhm.
and creativity, and how you tackle these things. Is there a way that you actively try to remove distractions? You can focus on this stuff.
And there's things that are like rabbit holes of that I try to avoid, of like reading the comments. And I think I can easily get distracted by things like that, or a lot of worrying and just like, is this going to succeed or fail? And there's so many unknowns just starting something new like this that ironically, that's kind of been the million subscriber mark that's been kind of on my mind of since the beginning, of like that's what a real YouTube channel has. And until you have that, you're not. Who knows if it's gonna succeed or fail? And now we're just on the brink of reaching a million. So that's both exciting, and then starting to kind of realize that like this is what it is now. Like I should be able to make this work now.
Mhm. I can relate to that in the sense that I mean, I think the Breakthrough's YouTube channel as of, mid-December now is, I think, 56,000 subscribers.
Mhm.
And it's like, I remember getting the first 1,000 subscribers
Yeah.
and thinking like, okay, that's cool, but won't 10,000 be cool?
Mhm.
And you get to 10,000, it's like, whoa, this is cool. It's something, there's videos are actually getting views now when I upload them and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And then to 50. And in my brain now, I'm like, the plaque would be cool. Like the
Yeah.
100,000 subscribers would be really cool. And that's my goal now for where I think this can be a lot more sustainable for
Mhm.
that kind of thing for us. It's just fascinating. And I'm pretty sure that once we hit 100,000, it'll be like, well, 250,000 would be nice, or
Yeah.
then 1 million, how have you handled that? Do you feel like the target just moves?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And I mean, we remember being at 56,000. That's like where we kind of plateaued after the initial viral of the sandwich. And then it just seemed like we're just stuck here. Like, this isn't a lot. And I think every milestone after that has felt so far off. And then we reach it. Social Blade does projections of when you're going to reach milestones. I remember back then checking, like, oh, it's going to take 14 years for us to reach 1 million.
YouTube might not be around in 14 years.
Yeah.
I've checked those projections too. They're hilarious. It's like, oh, 2025, I'll hit this thing. Perfect. That's great. That's great. It is amazing how YouTube works just with you'll make a video and it'll do way better than usual or not. And
Mhm.
you kind of just have to, I mean, you've obviously seen this with your channel now. What I've found is like the biggest thing you can do is just be consistent
Mhm.
and adapt.
Yeah.
If you're consistent in doing the same thing that doesn't work over and over, it
Mhm.
really, you're going to have a slow road. But if you experiment, try, test different things, you'll get there.
Yeah. I'd say that's like the biggest challenge is both trying to be aware of what is and isn't working and kind of reading people's reactions, but also not going into a pitfall of just becoming obsessive and like we're not reaching this milestone and we're not growing fast enough. And I think being aware of that is kind of a difficult balancing point.
If you don't mind talking about that a little bit, because
Sure.
that's something. I mean, stress, worry, these are things that we're dealing with.
Mhm.
Amy and I deal with this stuff just in terms of figuring out the logistics of running a business like this full time and creating stuff that people want to see and all this other stuff. Are there kind of ways that you manage that actively, that stress or that worry, so that you can just do your best work? It's hard to be creative when you're stressed.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I've found.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something I keep coming back to, unfortunately, but I think a big thing is just reminding myself why I'm doing this, that I'm not necessarily doing it for the money or the fame or for the views. I'm doing it because I enjoy it, and I'm intensely curious, and being able to dig in and do all these projects is just amazing. And it's kind of, if I wasn't getting paid, I would still want to be doing this. So it's a great opportunity. So when I focus on that, then it doesn't matter if people dislike my videos or if views are going down. I'm still doing what I want to do.
The fact alone that you spent 2 years filming something without is mind blowing to me, right? Like even on the timelines that we've had a project that we'll film for a week
Mhm.
and we'll get B-roll in certain places and we'll do certain things, but that's about as long as most of the stuff we've done. And so just thinking about working on that content, that project, that's awesome. And it's clear that you're driven by wanting to learn and just
Yeah.
grow this stuff. So what about like habits? Do you have a morning routine or an evening routine, or is there any kind of routine that you stick to that helps you with this stuff?
Not really.
That's totally fair. A lot of people
Yeah.
don't.
Like I probably should, but one thing I'm trying to transition into is kind of a more stable work life separation, because for the majority of this, I've been like filming in my own apartment and editing it in my extra bedroom and all of that. But recently this summer we got our own studio space, so it's been kind of the challenge of separating it and trying to get to like reasonable work hours, because it's been a lot of just like burn sessions and just like staying up all night to get a video done so we can release it, and trying to get out of that because it is kind of destructive to my personal life.
Yep. um, We've experienced that too, probably in a different capacity, because again, we're not doing stuff that is involving footage from all over the country in different times and things. But
Yeah.
that was one of the things. Amy and I have been doing this full time now since October of last year.
Mm.
So we're over a year of doing this full time together now, and it's been this really incredible learning and process of learning to try to set our own boundaries for things as a husband and wife. Like, when are we working and when are we
Yeah.
not working, and
Yeah.
and being together all day, but then not being together in a business capacity. Like, hey, let's go be a normal couple for a while. You know? That has been one of the biggest struggles of this thing, and I never expected this. I never expected that aspect of the difficulty of like just creating boundaries, of having a day that looks like a normal work day,
Mhm.
instead of like, oh, we work a little bit, eat, work more,
Yeah.
eat, go work out, come back, work until we're tired, and kind of it just doesn't. It's really, I never expected it to be this challenging in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. What does maybe a typical day look like for you right now, if there is a typical day?
Generally, so there isn't too typical, but usually get into the office and do the normal morning routine of checking emails and responding to stuff that needs to be responded to. And then at that point, it's very variable. It's either like a production day where I need to make something and film it, or I need to go and meet with an expert and do an interview, or editing something. I'd say a lot of my time is just kind of in pre-production, just kind of like figuring out how we're going to do the next step. So it's a lot of time just at the computer, like Googling 50 different things, trying to put the pieces together so we can move forward. Because that is always the challenge, that there's always something that you didn't account for. There's always something you need to adapt to as you go. I guess that's my average day.
So you've been doing the YouTube videos for years now,
Mhm.
and you recently started a podcast.
Yeah.
What drove the decision to change the format up like that?
It was actually we actually offered a deal by our MCN multi-channel network, Studio 71, to get on board. I think they started a podcast division or something like that. So they were interested in bringing YouTubers onto as podcasters and kind of tapping a new market. Just something I was kind of hesitant at first. Our workload is already overwhelming, so adding a whole other content type just seemed like a horrible idea. But then they were willing to offer us a budget, and like that, like, oh, that's very different than like trying to do something on our own. There are kind of side projects we've tried to launch that you put a ton of time into, and then you have no idea if there's going to be any payoff for it. But like with this deal, we knew even if it fails, we're going to get at least this amount of money. So that was definitely a motivating factor, was having that kind of safety net to it. Then it's been kind of a challenge of carving out the time in my schedule to actually do it. The best part about it is I'm trying to be as hands-off as possible. We have somebody we've collaborated with a lot in making the series, Taylor, and he's been pretty much in charge of the podcast. He's an audio guy, so it's kind of his world. It's been kind of interesting to kind of take my hands off the wheel with how to make everything. The YouTube channel, it's been very all up to me. And as we've grown, I've been learning to let go, and it's something that's probably a big goal for next year, is letting go more of it. But the podcast is something I'm trying to be as hands-off as possible and let other people kind of drive it in their direction. And if we start to go off a cliff, I might jump in. But
Right.
I guess it's kind of exciting because it is a different format. So it's something that mixes it up. And doing audio is so different from doing video. And we have different challenges where, like, video on YouTube, I feel like needs to be as short as possible, and so people don't click on something else. Or with a podcast, like, people hit play and then they drive or do something, so they don't mind a longer form, which is kind of nice because we do a lot of interviews with people for the YouTube, and we end up cutting out so much of it. And so being able to kind of revisit that, or kind of save the good interviews for the podcast, is something I'm looking forward to.
So you have someone doing the editing, right? Because that, to me, it seems like that would be one of the most time consuming aspects.
Yeah, I think up till just recently, it's been pretty much me doing the majority of the editing. I had other people doing parts of it, assembly, but then I would do the final and end up be the person who's up all night to finish it and get it out. As we're going forward, we're trying to expand and get that off my plate.
Mhm. That's one of the things I've been curious about too, is going from being a YouTuber to more of something that looks like a production company.
hmm
And how does one effectively do that without getting a bunch of funding, things like that up front in order to scale before it's quite ready?
hmm
Because a lot of the time I feel like for the content that YouTube requires, people, you want good content and helpful content and interesting content.
hmm
And in order to produce that, it's really hard. A lot of people do daily vlogging, stuff like that, but it's really hard to produce something good and helpful and what I'm sure to you feels like valuable, interesting stuff
hmm
by yourself.
hmm
And but then the idea of scaling up, that's something that I'm trying to figure out too. Is from here we have this. So Break the Twitch has this member community that's basically like Patreon, and so we have this amazing community that are supporting the work so that they're getting stuff, but also the public stuff is going out, and it's making it more possible to do this more sustainably. But
hmm
I just wonder, like, when is the right time to hire a part-time person to help with social media and editing? Like,
Yeah.
have you figured out if there is there a formula?
Yeah.
What is the formula?
I mean, I say that's probably one of our biggest challenges is that we started out as a 3-person team because then all the money is split 3 ways. So it's hard to afford to pay anybody on top of our whole concept being super difficult and expensive. So like if I had been able to do this by myself, I would have been at a better, I would have been more comfortable with financially and everything a lot sooner.
Yeah, it goes from creative pursuit to bigger creative pursuit to business problem
Yeah.
of figuring out how to sustainably grow. I have a friend that grew a pretty big online business, hired a bunch of people, and then eventually scaled back because he
Yeah.
realized that he didn't get into it to manage a bunch of people.
Yeah.
It does make you question, like, where is that place that is going to be where you're actually creating the stuff
Mhm.
instead of managing stuff?
Yeah.
And that's another challenge to face. I honestly used to think YouTubers had it so good, and this is work we choose, right?
Yeah.
And so for that, we do feel totally blessed. But I remember before I started on YouTube, and I would see like Casey Neistat or different people making stuff. It's like, you just make a video and upload it. It's like, no. Oh my gosh, there's so much that goes into this stuff.
Yeah.
That to make it worthwhile and to make it work. So that perspective definitely changed quickly.
Yeah. I get jealous of people who do videos that seem so much easier to make. But then I've collaborated with some people and they're facing some of the same problems of like having to release regular content, but then also be editing the night before, staying up all night. Is like, oh, you do that too?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, like it's not easy for many people. I mean, maybe vloggers, you can just turn it on, record it, and get instant success that way. But for most people, it's a grind, and there's money there, but I don't feel like it is really enough to make it worth it if you don't love what you're doing.
You gotta want to do the thing to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. What are some things that you're looking forward to right now?
Right now, I'm trying to figure out how to make a lens and keep running into issues of not having the right equipment or not having the right know-how. So that one keeps getting delayed, and so I'm gonna be very happy when I can finally get the lens done, because that's gonna combine some other challenges of making glass and making optics, which I didn't do super great for my previous attempts at eyeglasses and a telescope. So it's going to be kind of accumulating a lot of failures into a success. But right now I keep failing. So getting that done and completed is what I'm looking forward to now. And then being done with it, move on to another stuff.
Yeah, I guess I would rely on the clear glass
Yep.
and then actually shaping it into something that
Hmm.
shoots an image into a box.
Yeah.
Even the film.
Yeah. And then that's a whole other obstacle I'm going to add on after the lens is making the film.
Huh. Would that be like, would you go all the way back and do like a silver plate kind
Yeah.
of thing?
Yeah. And I collected silver 2 years ago, I think it was, with the eventual intent of using it for making film.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Just the forethought into the elements. I imagine you just, if you see something, you just pick it up now, right? like you're like, hey, that looks like this element or something.
Yeah.
You just get it because you never
Yeah.
know, right?
Yeah. I have a bunch of random stuff that just like came across it and like I don't know what I'm gonna do with it, but I need to collect it. I have like buckets of gypsum sand we collected because there's these dunes in Utah that are made mostly out of gypsum, and I don't know what I'm gonna do with it, but I have it.
Yeah. Inevitably, everything goes into stuff at
Yeah.
some point, right?
Yeah.
How has that changed your perspective about the way the world works just in the process of collecting this stuff?
Yeah. I mean, when I first started, it tended to be more like agriculture and growing stuff, and that changed my perspective a lot with animals and harvesting cotton and everything like that. Recently, we've been getting more into minerals, and that's always been something that I understood less, I guess. There's like, where you just go out and grab a rock and you make metal out of it. How does this work? So that's been very much changing my perspective of like going to an actual mine and seeing these kind of strange green rocks and collecting some of that and then actually getting out a copper metal from it.
What other types of technologies or projects are you kind of thinking about right now?
I think I mentioned before the electronics and electricity. That's my big goal for next year. Is to start moving into that. And we also just started a series on making musical instruments. So I made a drum, and then eventually add to it. I'm going to be meeting with a guitar maker soon, and there's kind of unlimited of how many different musical instruments there are. So I'm looking forward to like slowly building up my own band of my own instruments, and then eventually want to make like a phonograph to record it and then make it into a record.
You do really have unlimited content, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just every single, just even looking, just looking around what's happening right now, the microphone to the computers, recording and cameras and all these different things all come from these things. And you'll have plenty of content for the rest of time. As long as YouTube's around, you'll have stuff to make.
Yeah. It's interesting that now I'm kind of going into stuff that I didn't think I could have in the beginning. When I started out, it was a sandwich. I was like, I can make sandwiches, I can make different food items, I can make clothing. Now it's like, now I'm going to make a computer.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for that video when we start processing zeros and ones through microprocessors and such. Behind you over there is it is the vase or vase of questions. These have been left by previous guests and a couple YouTube commenters, and then Amy and I created a couple to get things started for season 1. So you may get any of those things, but go ahead and pull a question out. You can dump it out if you want to go into the bottom there, and then we'll have you question. Then we'll be having you submit your own as well at the end of the interview.
When you slip up, how do you reset, renew to continue?
Okay, who is that? Is that a
Jessica Chung?
Oh yeah, Jessica Chung, previous guest, season 1 podcast. She's also she's a YouTuber as well, actually.
So if I'm ever super stressed or frustrated or anything like that, I go for a run, and that's usually my default reset. And there's times in my life when I've been injured and unable to run, and those are the worst. It's like, I don't know what to do now. I need to go for a run.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings up another question now. So running is totally a habit.
Mm-hmm.
How did that start? Did you start early on, or was it something you came into later?
Something I came into later. It was kind of in my sandwich era when I was just out of school, and I was kind of getting frustrated with life and disappointed with how my life had been going. And I wanted to change something about myself, just just a goal I had of like, I don't like where I'm at. I want to change this. So what's one thing I can change? And I had never been athletic. I thought I had heard about the couch to 5K. Like, oh, that sounds really easy. I mean, growing up, I always do like the mile run at school and stuff. I never been able to run it. Never ran an actual mile. So I just started doing it, and I found it was actually not that hard. And before I knew it, I had to like do the kilometer to mile translation to like, oh, I've been running a mile for the past couple weeks. And I just kept going from there. And I did the couch to 5K, then I went to the 5K to 10K. And then I was like, all right, I'm just going all in. I'm just going to do a marathon.
Whoa. Yeah.
So then I started marathon training. And I think I went from like a year and a half from never being a runner to running my first marathon. And that I feel like has kind of been kind of the foundation block to a lot of my life of just, of initially thinking I can't do this to doing it all the way to an extreme of a marathon.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, that's a big habit thing.
Mhm.
Do you go a couple times a week? Like what is are you still trying to run consistently now like that?
I try to. I actually have an injury right now that I'm
Oh.
like trying to get over or whatever. Probably just getting older, and I guess my running technique isn't perfect, so I need to retrain it.
Getting older, man.
Yeah.
Amy and I have been, for the last year, have been doing a program called Strong Lifts. Well, we've just kind of been working out, but the Strong Lifts thing has been just over the last 6 months or so.
Mhm.
And, you're doing like squats and
Yeah.
deadlifts and overhead press and bench press and stuff. And it's amazing what just slow, just small, continuous change
Mhm.
allows you to create. When I started out, I was trying to squat about 110 pounds.
Mhm.
And a friend of mine introduced me to it, and he had me do it a couple times, couple reps with about 100, I don't know, 110 pounds. And I couldn't walk for 2 weeks. It was really bad.
Yeah.
But then that got me hooked. And I realized that I could squat. I was always afraid of my knees and other
Mhm.
issues like that because I've
Yeah.
always had bad knees.
Yeah.
And slowly but steadily between March and now in December, I just kept doing it a couple times a week and work my way up. And I'm like repping 275 now on the squats. And never in my life did I think that would even be remotely possible.
Mhm.
And it just speaks to the power of just get out there, do a little bit, do it over and over and over again. Well, Andy, where can people find you online?
So our YouTube channel is youtube.com/makeeverythingtv. And our podcast is called Simply Complex, and you can find it on pretty much any podcasting platform.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for coming on. It
thanks
was
for
a
having me.
pleasure to meet you and chat and look forward to more of your stuff coming up.
Thank you.
All right. And just like that, our conversation is over. If you enjoyed this episode, please do take a moment to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It is a huge help to podcasts like this one to get the word out about it to others. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll see you in the next one.